Thank you, members of the committee. I know it's been, the last few days have been long, and we've heard a lot of testimony on this bill. I'm here this morning to speak specifically about Section 6 of the bill, which addresses Georgia's exact match policy. First, we know the exact match policy has an extraordinarily high error rate because it relies on the work of county election officials who input voter registration data into the match system. And so these errors can happen not only by the person filling out the form themselves, but also by the election officials. Lines 123 to 127 address data errors, but it simply cannot guarantee any safeguards about that type of human fallibility. The language doesn't provide any guidance on how each of the 159 counties will implement this review process, which opens the door for inconsistencies and variations. Further, there's no oversight by a central body, and there's no way to ensure this accountability. The language in the bill is also unable to address mismatches that occur within the Department of Driver Services or the Social Security Administration, whose departments are subject to the same data entry errors. We know that the legislation disproportionately impacts voters of color, with African American voters constituting 70% of pending registrations, and Asian Americans, Latino, and African American voters constituting 80% of pending registrations. In fact, as we were sitting up here the last 2 days, I happened to notice our subcommittee assignments in our folders, and if you turn your attention to that, you can see that my last name is misspelled, as well as Representative Shannon's first name. I happen to be Asian American, and Representative Shannon happens to be African American. As the legislation is written, if applicants do not cure the no match results, they're simply removed from the registration rolls entirely after 26 months. This simply means we're continuing the process of purging voters from the rolls, and we're putting the burden solely on the voter to fix it. In this particular case, 26 months is a much shorter time frame than in relation to Section 11, which is a good faith effort to extend the time frame in which inactive voters are kept on the rolls from 3 years to 5 years. If you pay attention to line 153 to 157, that does in fact provide a timeline for notice to the applicant. However, there are limitations to that notice, with the exception of Gwinnett County, who must provide that notice in Spanish, because all of those notices are sent out in English. So this doesn't adequately address the needs of non-English speakers, and it's a logical assumption based on the high number of pending registrations that there are limited English proficient applicants who are impacted by this. An example would be somebody like my mother, who came to this country as a refugee when she was 30 years old, and she had to learn how to read and write English as her second language. Her proficiency is such that she can register to vote, but if she received a notice in English saying that her registration was flagged due to an exact match issue, she would not understand that implication. So what message are we trying to send when we enact policies like this that have such inherent flaws? I want to provide some context on how our constituents are affected by this policy. Currently, there are over 50,000 voter registrations in pending status. Nearly 10,000 of these are in Republican-led districts, and the remaining 45,000 are in Democratic-led districts. Every single one of our 180 districts has voters who are currently in pending status due to this policy. Now, District 21 has the lowest number with 20 frozen registrations. Can you help pass these out, Mary Margaret? And District 57 has the highest number with 2,980 frozen registrations. My own House District 89 has 850 registrations in pending status. I've provided you with the numbers of the constituents in your respective districts that are impacted by this policy, which is being passed around right now. I also want to reiterate this point. Federal law does require that voter registration applications do match the acceptable forms of IDs, i.e. your driver's license or social security number. But what federal law does not require is that we freeze registrations that are flagged in this exact match system. This is where the problem comes in. If federal law does not require us to freeze these registrations that are in pending status, then why are we doing it? Why would we continue to place ourselves And why are we continuing to subject ourselves to this inherently flawed legislation that could potentially be ruled unconstitutional in the next 6 months? Why would we take a position that penalizes people who don't happen to vote in every single election? And why would we not be proactive about fixing this legislation while we have the opportunity to do so now in subcommittee, rather than waiting for the Secretary of State to settle yet another lawsuit? So what exactly are we doing with this policy? Are we just disenfranchising people because we believe they're not diligent enough? If that's the case, we should all really be concerned. I want to give you an example of what that means. I have a stack of my committee notices here, and my last name is spelled incorrectly. I submitted a form each time to my committees, spelling my last name correctly. I know how to spell my last name, but here are 4 different instances in different committees where my last name is spelled incorrectly. And this is due to human error. It's simply because my name is non-Anglo and is unfamiliar to most people. For most people, our brains are just not trained to put this combination of letters in this particular order. So the Nguyen, they're switched all the time. It's because when any person looks at it, it doesn't make sense if you are not a Vietnamese speaker. And so this is what we mean by human fallacy. This cannot be guaranteed that it will be corrected by a review process, which is likely another human being looking at the same name and not recognizing that fallacy, because that's just simply how our brain works. And so when we ask the question of diligence, is it the person who's inputting the name that's not being diligent, or does it mean I'm not being diligent enough? Fortunately, we don't have to make that assertion. We don't have to answer those questions, because we know that this legislation is rooted in human fallacy, and we can fix that. So we have an amendment prepared in order to address this, which is sitting in an envelope on everyone's desk. I don't have the number, the reference, which is AM 281674. What this simply does is it enables a voter to register, and then if for some reason they are flagged in the exact match system, they simply go to the polls and they show their IDs as we normally would to verify their identification, instead of placing them in frozen pending status and endangering their ability to vote if they don't fix that within that 26 months.